Hi everybody. I'm so sorry that the recording didn't come through on Wednesday when we did it in live time. Sometimes technology just gives us a little wobble, doesn't it? But here I am. I'm gonna re-record it for you, and I hope that you can find a few little golden nuggets to support you on your journey, wherever you're at with it. But I wanted to start with a little bit of a personal anecdote just to kind of bring to life why I chose to kind of take a little deep dive, I suppose, into today's topic. And I wanted to talk a little bit more in depth about the nervous system and what they actually are. Let's make a little bit more sense of them. I know that you've probably looked a little bit at it with Fawn, or as you've been working through your modules, maybe different readings. I'm really noticing in the psychology world that every time I kind of come across a new quote, a new theory, a new response, a new experiment, I feel like everything's starting to root back to this idea that yes, we should pay attention to our thoughts. Yes, we need to listen to and explore, the root, really recognizing our limiting beliefs. But within that, we also need to pay attention to the body. And I think it's really powerful because the more that I study the body, that's a little bit my expertise and my deep interest. But I find like the body does tell us a lot more than we realize, and we need to stop and listen. And so today, I'd like to title this session just Coming Home to Your Body and exploring the power of the nervous system and the vagal response. We're going to look at those two aspects of the body and what they're doing, what they're telling us, what they're teaching us, and how we can gain that little bit of calm back in order to tackle tough things. Because in life, those of us who've experienced trauma, myself included, sometimes that trauma is like deeply hidden. Sometimes it comes out in your adult life and you might have buried it. Maybe it's something that you've kind of been built in or haven't spoke about or worked through until this chapter. Whatever your story is, it is all good. But the body would have stored that in some way, shape, or form. So my personal anecdote is this. My trauma is rooted in childhood. And without going into too much detail, I just wanted to share that it manifested itself as I kind of worked through life with the tight chest, with the feelings that come with what we describe as anxiousness, nervousness, but as I grew into like my late 20s, early 30s, I found myself constantly in and out of the doctors. And I was forever having tests, cameras, all sorts because my stomach health and you know, it was really just like out of sorts. I was really struggling with different pains, all sorts of things. We were looking at whether it potentially was like ulcerative colitis. We were looking at, a range of things because I was also vomiting every morning. And I'm only sharing this with you because what I realized after many tests and lots of inconclusivity and not much coming back, I do value the doctors and medicine and all that they put into supporting me. But what I found was actually the only thing I happened to change in my life at a time where all of that health issue, all of that gut health, all of even my, the chest, my asthma was starting to get better. I really noticed a huge like health shift was actually when I started yoga. And I'm not saying, in this clip today to talk to you, everybody do yoga. But the elements of yoga, when I researched part of training as a yoga teacher, something that I chose to do later on just to deepen my understanding, I kind of wanted to know why this project practice became such an instrument for healing for me as a person. And again, everybody just needs to find like their instrument, their thing, that thing that helps them calm themselves. Everything, when I did research, becoming a yoga teacher meant that there were papers that we needed to write that were, cited and looked at in depth. And I was really lucky to come across and explore the reasons why it impacted on my body. And it all rooted back to the impact on my nervous system. And so today we're going to just break down, we're going to look a little bit at both of your nervous systems. We're going to kind of look at how they give you wisdom, they give you information, um, and how they actually are working to protect you. And so I'm sure you've come across this before, that when we are in a space where we feel like our stress response, we feel like we're in protection mode, that is one of our nervous systems reacting. But also when you're able to rest and relax and sleep, all of that is also really powerful as well. And that is often you working from your other nervous system. So you can kind of tell just looking at those two kind of opposites, those juxtaposed kind of feelings, that we do have those two experiences running through our bodies. And so when we look a little bit at it, our nervous system is kind of like our command center of our body, and it helps us process information and respond to the world. But again, it's not just about thinking, it's like deeply rooted in how we feel, how we breathe, how we move, and how we relate. My question for you is, you could, write it down or draw like a little stick man or something, or just think about it even. But if I said to you, where does your emotion, where does your kind of feelings when you feel overwhelmed, or anything that is a feeling that feels heavy, where does that sit in your body? And for me, it was like in the chest and the belly. And you could all very clearly from, my anecdote, you can tell that those are the two spaces in which, I was feeling that. And actually, through something like yoga or breathing or moving or talking, there's so many different like psychologically backed ways in which we can tap into our common nervous system. What I hadn't realized is I'd never ever really done that in years. So let's look today. Let's look at the nervous systems. Let's look at them in a little bit more depth and find some strategies and ways in which we can tap into that calm response. And I want to teach you a little bit more about that vagal nerve, or that vagus nerve, and the vagal response, and how that's responsible as well for us to stay calm. And it's not always about being calm, right? We're always going to live in these fluctuations. But if we can understand the body, we can name it, then we have more ability to take control. We also have the ability to recognize when things creep up, that, hey, actually, I don't have to feel like this for a long period of time, potentially my whole life, up until finding a space for breathing and moving my body in a way that really benefited, me. Everybody's different. But until I started to move and shift and understand this nervous system, and I could take control of my nervous system, then I found that I was, not quite living in a space where like I could, breathe and see things clearly, and let go of that kind of always being in that fight or flight response and that stress response. Um, and yeah, life is funny, isn't it? So, the two main branches of your nervous system are your sympathetic nervous system. And I always laugh because sympathetic makes me feel like, oh, sympathetic means that, oh, you kind of showing care. But actually, the sympathetic nervous system is the one that is almost way oversensitive. It is like looking out. If you've had that experience of trauma in your past, then all of a sudden it's going ding, 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 this kind of represents something around this area. So, let's close down. And there's different ways in which we do that. But that sympathetic nervous system is what sends you into like fight or flight mode. Almost imagine you like a little meerkat, prop trap, always like looking, always checking, always making sure that everything's okay, or avoiding things. There's so many different reactions that we have, but that's just your body. It's trying to keep you safe. But equally, if we're forever living in that sympathetic nervous system, you could imagine, where do you feel it? If you think about your body, like sometimes we tense in the hands. I'm a real jaw clencher. Will kind of move a little bit, do some practical work at the end, but clenching the jaw in itself, even something small like that, actually creates all that neck and shoulder pain that we often have. And it's even been researched recently that it's connected a little bit with pelvic and hip pain. So releasing in the jaw, kind of letting go, is actually really powerful. And we're holding that stress, we're holding that worry, that feeling of anxiousness, maybe within the body as well. And we do have an opportunity to physically release it in order to clear the mind and tackle things, with resilience and a little bit more confidence. And I really like the analogy for your sympathetic nervous system that it's like a smoke alarm. So it's very useful in danger, right? And the old analogy that you've probably heard is like I think it's often likened to a bear or a saber-toothed tiger like jumping out at you. We needed this. We need this as human beings. It's really normal. It's really important. And actually, you're just being and having a human experience if you are experiencing fight or flight. And when I talk about that, if we were like living back in caveman days and we did need this skill, we would be able to decide whether we run, whether we fight, whether we freeze and stay still and, then make a decision. But that's for those big things like a tiger, like a bear, but actually where our body has now become very oversensitive, especially after trauma. And I'm not saying that that's a bad thing. Your body's again trying to protect you. It's a little bit oversensitive to those things. And I always think of my own house. My smoke alarm actually is super oversensitive. I'll be cooking something and one small drip will make it go, wah, wah. And my children are like, Mommy, what's going on? And you're thinking, no, don't worry, there's not a fire. But also it's really helpful because my brain's like really happy that it works. And if there was something, that I did need to be in fight or flight about, I know that my body will respond, or my smoke alarm, right, is going to respond. But equally, it's exhausting on the body and it's tiresome in the body. And actually our internal organs, we'll look a little bit at the power of breath in a minute, but our internal organs need more than that short, sharp breath. We need to be breathing deeply. We also need the other nervous system, your calm nervous system, to support you. So looking again a little bit more streamlined at that sympathetic nervous system, it increases the heart rate, often that muscle tension, like we talked about, that alertness sometimes like means that our sleep can be rattled a little bit. And sleep means, that the brain doesn't always have the ability to heal, or the mind to clear and make sense of things that you've experienced in the day. So we do need to check in and think like, hey, am I always, or am I often or most often in this sympathetic state? And my personal experience from that was I was always in that state. It wasn't a saber-toothed tiger jumping out at me, but it had become, in my work, like the sickness that I was having was almost this like visceral reaction to like what is going to come at me today that I cannot handle. And there was never anything. There was never anything that I couldn't handle. I couldn't ask for help with. I couldn't seek support with. But I was living in this place because I had never really spent any time naming it, understanding it, recognizing what it was in my body. And so well done for taking the time to kind of sit and learn, because I definitely found this like game changing. And if like me, you like a metaphor, I'll give you one more just to really kind of solidify where we're at with that sympathetic response. And I love to think of it as like an accelerator in a car. It is great because it gets you moving fast. It gets the heart rate, the body, like sometimes you get that adrenaline running through you, but when it's stuck when it's stuck in that like, that accelerating kind of place, imagine almost like a Formula One car that just can't stop driving round and round and round. It can make us feel like that space of anxiousness or jumpy or overwhelmed or irritable. And that's why it's there. It gets us moving, it gets us going, but actually it can become physically, emotionally exhausting to live in that space all the time. And I think that that's really important for us to recognize, like that's, you're just human and there's nothing wrong. There's nothing wrong with us. Once we have language for it, we can go, hey, sometimes I talk to myself, I talk to the brain and body, and I recognize like, whoa, actually, I'm sat here and I'm like having this like very, fight or flight response, which I still absolutely get. And then I have a little toolbox to work through it. Because I know that my brain and my body are preparing me for stress. I'm telling myself that it's normal. We get this massive cortisol, adrenaline hit. Again, it also decreases digestion, our sympathetic nervous system, which is where my gut health was coming from. It. I'm breathing short in the chest as well, and my breath wasn't going deep. My organs aren't getting any sort of like movement at all. Wasn't working like out or walking or doing much movement in my life. So again, the body staying stagnant, and then my digestion was really suffering. And so the second I implemented breath, a little bit of movement, boom, it's crazy, but like I no longer had to go to the hospital. It was kind of like my whole life changed. And all I did was implement, a little bit of theory. I learned about my body. I started to do some deep breathing. I used yoga. Yoga supported me personally, but it could be anything from a small walk. It could be sitting on a chair doing a twist and taking on some deep breath. Any of these things can support with any of that physical, like, stuff, anything that feeling stuck within the body. And we'll talk about how all of that movement not only starts to like shift us in terms of potentially our gut health, our breath, our body, our lung capacity, maybe even like, the studies suggest, I've got one here that says James Nestor, he was doing this great TED talk, not TED talk, sorry, it was a podcast with Stephen Bartlett, The Diary of a CEO. You wanted to kind of have a little look at that. James Nestor, he looks at the health outcomes of breath on the body in terms of its physical capacity, its physical health, and mental health. And he looked at just those people that have taken time to implement some deep breathing to tap into the parasympathetic, the second nervous system we're going to talk about more often. Those people that have a little bit more control, that have deepened, expanded a little bit in their rib cage, have breathed a little bit deep into the belly. It's talking about their mental health, their overall happiness, their contentment, and also talking even about longevity. It's quite wild. The impact of kind of just using what we have in something as simple as our breathing, because our breathing is one of our number one indicators of where we are at in our nervous system. So, sympathetic nervous system, most often, if you were to ask yourself, if you took a quick breath with me now, just breathe in and breathing out. Now, if you're kind of tight in the chest, or you were breathing a little slower and thought my breath feels like tight a little bit here, that's often that sympathetic system. We're like fight or flight, like a little bit worrisome, short breaths. If you experienced any sort of panic in your past, that's that short breath. And so that is us living in that sympathetic system. That's the one, the fight or flight. But the great news is that we have two. We've got one keeping us safe, but we got to tell ourselves, hey, like I don't need you all the time. You're exhausting. I don't want to be in accelerating all the time. Right? I want to take a deep breath, and I want to be in that space where my body can actually rest and digest. And that's your parasympathetic nervous system. And that's that system, when your body kind of comes, I like to just call it like calm and peace, that space in which you actually feel like yourself, you feel comfortable, you feel relaxed, you don't feel like you're ruminating, and ruminating is just that fancy word for like overthinking. You just kind of feeling like maybe in your flow, you're feeling all right, you're feeling, in a good place. And within that space, they say rest and digest, because actually with rest, when the body rests, the brain actually starts to kind of reconfigure. So all of the tabs that you've opened up start to go into the files that they need to go into. The body actually, when you tap into that calmer nervous system more often, all of a sudden your body starts to kind of do the work it needs to do. It actually will start to like digest and start to move things through the body as it should. How crazy, right? And so you start to develop more of your growth hormones, melatonin helps you with your sleep, and your sleep in terms helps with, honestly, could do a whole talk on sleep. I think I mentioned that often. Maybe I'll try and remember that one next month, maybe. But the power of sleep is just incredible. If you can, I understand it's tough for many of us, different stages of life. I'm definitely like in that, any women in the group with that perimenopause, or it's hard. Sleep comes and goes for many of us for many different reasons within our, our lives and our experiences, and whether our mind, our thinking or our bodies are in line. But if we can start to like support ourselves in producing melatonin just by knowing that we can tap into this, other nervous system, then what a win, right? You start to produce oxytocin as well, when you start to tap into some of those things. And oxytocin is that like happy drug, not drug, but like hormone that runs through the body. And so when you, for example, see like an old friend and you give them a hug, or you can also get it from like being around an animal. Oxytocin is often just called that hugging drug. Like it's that hormone that runs through the body when you're connecting with people. And then in turn, that starts to kind of impact on your heart rate and slows things down and taps into that parasympathetic system. And overall, it's really great because it does decrease the heart rate and your blood pressure, which is awesome, right? We, want to have that all of those healthy things running through the actual physical body despite our trauma. And we want to, get back into a place where the body can repair. And if we're always in the sympathetic nervous system, it's much harder for the body to do that for you. And that this whole process, the sympathetic and the parasympathetic, fits under the umbrella of the autonomic nervous system. And that autonomic nervous system, like it supplies like your internal organs, with all the information it needs, from blood vessels to stomach to intestines, livers, genitals, like lungs, you name it. And so if it's affecting like every little aspect of our body, then actually how powerful for us to take a little bit more control of it, right? So yeah, when your nervous system is a bit more balanced, when you're moving into that parasympathetic aspect of your nervous system, then you really can feel safe, calm, and connected. And so bringing it back to that lovely metaphor we were looking at earlier, I like to refer to this as like your brake pedal. So you imagine that you're in that acceleration point and you're like, you feel like you're not coming off that road, right? It's this parasympathetic nervous system that like really helps you to slow down, to feel grounded, and again, just to be present. And I think it's important to think and talk, even briefly about this idea of being present, because those of us who have experienced trauma, it's very common that our brain is often like in a cycle of, maybe rethinking things in the past, reevaluating and going in circles. That's your state of rumination. And if not, we're ping-ponging into the future. And that's kind of your state of sympathetic nervous system, where you're starting to try and predict the future and avoid at any cost having anything, overwhelming happen, anything that you feel like you can't tackle. You can tackle it all. It's just your body's going, I want to protect you. I want to protect you from all those things in the future that may not happen. Remember, it's something that I have to remind myself all the time. But I personally like do not have a skill in reading, the future. I cannot see what's ahead of us. So sometimes it's about just trying to, not have that present moment stolen away, this present moment right now. Let's just take a moment. You're sat, you've got the opportunity to learn, you have a roof over your head, you've got a safe space to breathe, to be, hopefully you've had something to eat or drink today, and you've got someone or more than one person around you that cares about you. There's a richness in all of that. And that doesn't take away from the past or any sort of trauma or work or healing that we need to do. But it just reminds us that as we're going through the process, as we kind of, we can recognize like, hey, it's time to stop like overthinking in that past. And I'm not a future, I can't tell what's going on in the future. So I'm going to let that just be. And maybe right now, sometimes I'm going to try and just be in that present moment. And by doing that, by doing skills and techniques that take us into the present moment, it all works because it taps into the parasympathetic nervous system. So we're trying to get our body in control, get our body into that system, that then we can also, the correlation and the connection with the brain is that when you're in fight or flight, the amygdala is going off. And that's the part of the brain that's like, danger, 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 right? But actually, if we are not in danger, but you have this alarm going off, it's very hard to think clearly, right? You think about that, like, bing, 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 or that smoke, it's foggy. And what we need to do is we need to turn that alarm off or turn the volume down at least so that we can think clearly and we can make the decisions that we need. We can make sense of things. And if things are difficult and challenging, we can tackle them. We know that we can bounce back and we don't always have to live in this like fear state, right? In this stress response. So yeah, it's super powerful. The brainstem and the limbic system, that's our emotional center. They're deeply connected to the nervous system. And, trauma can often rewire us to be like more vigilant, a little bit more hypersensitive. The good news is that the brain and the nervous system can also learn what, safety, the truth in safety again. And so one theory I wanted to kind of just highlight today a little bit is the polyvagal theory by Stephen, I think you say it Porges. I'm not sure. It's spelled Porges. And when you search the vagal nerve, it's not vagus. So the vagus nerve or the vagal response, not vagus as in Las Vegas. It's vagus, the vagus nerve. He talks a little bit about how if we can tap into this specific nerve, it then really directly correlates with getting us into that parasympathetic system. And it communicates between the brain and the body about our safety cues, and it can start to shift our entire kind of nervous state, which is pretty cool. And so the basics of that polyvagal theory developed by Stephen Porges, it gives a new way of understanding like how this nerve, it's a long cranial nerve. So I've always understood it that it was kind of a long nerve that runs right from your brainstem, down through your neck into your chest and your abdomen. And it's this major part of that parasympathetic system, rest and digest. And when I studied yoga, for example, what I notice is that when we do any work where we're concentrating on the center of our body, when we take that lovely twist, we breathe in and slowly breathe out, we're starting to tap into that little bit of that belly breath. I'm going to take you through some great little techniques in the next few minutes, actually, to support you. But I want you to have the theory and know that it's all rooted in science. So we're trying to activate this vagal response, that nerve that's going to give the messages to the brain, to the body, and tell you what's safe. And actually, if we practice in a calm, safe space, we can teach the body that actually right now at home or right now at work, I don't have to be in my stress response. I'm just, it's just me checking my emails. It's just me relaxing for the end of the night. I've had a lot of time to think, or I was triggered a little bit today, but I don't have to be triggered for my whole day, or my whole week. And that's where the knowledge is power. It's teaching yourself going, hey, I've been in that nervous place for a little while. I'm going to tap into that calm state now. So I imagine it like talking to yourself, but it's not. It's you recognizing through the theory. So in different ways in which we can kind of tap into that vagus nerve. Number one, I'm going to take you through breath work. Some of it you might know already. Never bad to work with it now with the theory. But my favorite one is the double inhale followed by a slow exhalation. Now, the exhalation, especially the first few times that you do it with me, don't worry about how slow that it goes. It's just trying to slow it down each time. And I like the double inhale because it allows me just to kind of extend it a little bit and then exhale and just feel that breath shift. I want you to check in before you do this with me, just how you feel right now. Okay. I don't know about you, but I'm probably somewhere in the middle, maybe a little bit in like straddling the line of being in my stress response and maybe a little bit into that parasympathetic. I'm kind of not one or the other. So it would be really great to tap into that parasympathetic. All right, we're going to have a little go. See if you feel any difference in your brain and your body. We're going to do breathe in. It is going to look like this. Good. So you can do it with the mouth open or closed. I'll take you through it again. Breathe in, and out. Again. And just naturally let it be what it's going to be. One more time. Inhale. And exhale. Slow it down if you can. And just stop. Sometimes my body feels a little tingly, a little lightheaded. Sometimes it works straight away. Sometimes I need to carry on with it. But I find like this one, if you felt any sort of shift, that is that like direct, like hijacking to that parasympathetic. I definitely feel a little calmer sat here. And it's also something really cool because nobody has to know you're doing it. If it's when you're driving to work, you're about to go into a meeting, you're about to have a hard conversation with a partner, you felt overwhelmed maybe with a tough situation with children, triggered by trauma, whatever it is that has maybe made you feel that stress response. You can take yourself away after or before, or even in the middle of, just find a section, go to the toilet, close your eyes, turn around. You can do the breath really subtle and quietly as well. But I think it's a real win. And I really do feel like it takes you right into that lovely, like calm space. It's really, really healthy. And breathing slower helps you keep the heart rate steady, helps you with rest, digest, healing, and even actually helps us to engage a little bit more socially, which is pretty good. So yeah, breath. You can manipulate it. You can notice from your breath how you're actually, what nervous system you're in. It's okay if the breath is often tight, but we do need to try and slow that exhalation down. That's super important. The next thing I want to think about, if I wanted to kind of take you to that place where my anecdote might help. Breath, sometimes where it's tight in the chest, we don't always send the breath deep all the way through. We don't always fill the lungs like they could be filled. We often don't breathe at all into the belly, which is quite important, maybe more than you realize in terms of our health. And this is the breath that in particular that I found through yoga. It's not just a yoga breath, but this is the breath that actually was life changing to everything from my gut health to my asthma. I genuinely like went from like a daily inhaler to just having to have it on like for emergencies, and again, I'm on zero medication for my gut health when, we were talking, endless testing. So yeah, I haven't no, I can't tell you last time I was ill when I wasn't like, had like gastro and something like that. And so it is powerful. I'm going to start here. My camera's a little bit high, but just bring your hands to the belly. So just set the hands on the belly just like that. It doesn't matter how they sit. That's kind of where you want to be. And we're going to breathe into that belly. Just see if you can feel the hands like almost like a balloon. So you're going to breathe in, you're going to feel it fill, and breathe it in, out. Just let it fall down. Good. Inhale, feel the belly fill. And exhale, feel the belly fall. Just keep that going. Breathing in, feel it fill. And exhale. Good. Sending the breath there, filling it up. This is directly tapping. Keep it going into that vagus nerve. Like I said, that vagus nerve runs from the cranial, the back of the neck, all the way down through the chest to the belly. So breathing here, in and out. We're also moving the organs. Imagine the organs, like if last time you've done a belly breath or maybe felt a breath go that deep, your body and the organs are meant to just stay stagnant. You're actually going to create that internal health working inwards. Super powerful. And you can continue with that as long as you like. You can just do that breath on its own. But another one you could do is then take your hands. So I want you to find like the rib cage. And often there's like your two little kind of call them the floating ribs. They sticking out a little bit. But if you can sit your hands like on your rib cage, so you can find that little floating rib, and no worries if not. But what we want to do is just breathe into the rib cage. I want you to feel the rib cage fill. So breathe in really deep. You're going to really start to feel it open. The chest opens. Exhale. Good. Notice how the space that's filled with air. Again, inhale. Again, we're filling that space. Beautiful. And exhale. Awesome. Breathing in. Feel that space fill. And breathing out. Good. Inhaling. Feel that space fill. And exhaling. Good. And just stop. Take a little moment, notice how you might have felt so far. And again, you can continue that breath over and over, whatever feels good to you. But that in itself is really great. That breath to the belly, filling the ribs. And then the last layer is to bring the hands. We obviously breathe often into the chest, but we want to bring the hands on the collarbones and just see if you can take a deep breath here, filling the hands, inhaling and exhale, slow it down. Good. So not just a shallow breath, a lovely deep breath, inhaling. Exhale slowly. Beautiful. Breathing in. Exhale slowly. Breathing in and exhale slowly. Awesome. Cool. And just stop. Take a little moment. Those are awesome ways. That's a great start. The breath is probably one of your most natural elements that you can play with. And there's many other available bits of breath work. You can try a breath work class if you wanted. There's loads of different styles. You can try square breathing, triangle breathing, Google it. I go through it a little bit in your module 3 as well. But breathing is that number one hack. I think it's one of your quickest hacks to get into the parasympathetic nervous system. My second hack is actually super, super powerful. There's a TED talk that I often reference. I can't get enough of it, actually, by Kelly McGonigal. And if you wanted to just look it up, it's called Make Stress Your Friend. Again, something that I reference a little bit in module 3, but I'm going to reference it here as well because it is just her knowledge is just next to none. But she suggests that when you are in full stress response, the number one thing that's going to help you, not only mentally, but physically, is to go find another human being and find some level of connection. You can even find like an animal and see if you can just go not be on your own, like go sit with somebody. And I find I've always worked in coaching or in my own kind of experience. It's not always that I need to go find that person to talk through maybe what I'm going through, which I would absolutely do if that feels right to me in that moment. And I think I just really need to speak and connect in that way. That is awesome. Talking therapy, talking to friends, leaning on people, sharing how you feel is magic. Because in itself, like that problem shared starts to support the brain and making sense of it, helps to calm the nervous system. It also even strengthens the heart. You start to get all of that oxytocin that we're talking about because you feel connected. You feel that sense of love and somebody's listening and you feel heard. And so it is hard though as well, because when you're in the sympathetic nervous system, fight or flight, that flight response often makes you want to isolate. And, I naturally would say that like I do have a tendency to lean more into introversion, into being on my own, maybe staying quiet, not wanting to bother people with kind of how I'm feeling. But one of the number one, we're talking scientifically researched things that you should do when you're feeling that kind of maybe that low mood experience. Maybe you've been triggered, maybe the body's in that sympathetic state, you're maybe in a space of anxiousness. The number one thing is to go and connect, go and find your animal and make eye contact with that dog, that cat, go for a walk, phone a friend. You don't have to physically be there. Phone somebody that will potentially pick up the phone you back, send them a text. Don't do it alone. And that human connection is just worth its weight in gold. And again, it's going to get you out that freeze or that shutdown state. Sometimes we go into a place, it's very natural, especially, if it's tied to trauma, actually. It's very, very normal that there's a tendency to want to kind of numb or disconnect or even just like collapse. The body might even feel heavy and just want to shut down. You might feel that sense of exhaustion. That's really normal based on, the trauma response. That's our body going like, I'm going to just close up and I'm going to stay safe here under this shell. But the opposite is what you need in order to kind of break through and get yourself into that space. Kelly's theory even suggests that connecting with any other person or group of people, find a group, get out into the community, go do a Zumba class, whatever it is, like in itself, like being around other people and pulling yourself out of that space can then even not only shift your whole physical body, it starts to shift your mind, it shifts the hormone response that you have, and it can even strengthen your heart. And so I definitely think that, it's really important, especially for those of us who've had experiences in trauma, that, the nervous system can easily get stuck in fight, flight, and freeze mode. And it's normal. And you've probably been feeling that. And I definitely did, even in safe environments, the body may like stay hyper vigilant, maybe shut down because it feels like that body hasn't had a chance to update that computer, that the danger has passed. And that's where this polyvagal theory, that's where breath and movement and connection, all like supports in showing us that healing doesn't, it happens through talking, and it happens through doing lots of, psychology work and things like that, but it often, it requires regulating that nervous system, first. And that's where learning about our nervous system, regulating it, means we're trying to move out of fight or flight a little bit more often. It gives us, emotional regulation, better sleep, better digestion, social connection, trauma integration. And what I mean by that, it means that the trauma doesn't kind of drive everything that you do. Trauma is part of your story. There's triggers, but you are the one back, in the driver's seat of your life. And that vagus nerve, if we're intentionally stimulating it through breath, through movement, through the body, and that's something, I will advocate for moving your body as your number three, top tip from breath connection. And number three is moving your body. That's where, where I obviously reference yoga because that was my thing, but it could be anything from like joining a walking group. How many are you ticking there by just, walking with somebody and having to chat with them, getting your body going, just taking those breaths, twisting. A twist is really powerful to get into that vagal response. You could just twist the body, take a slow, deep breath to the belly. So maybe twist to one side, breathing in. You'll feel the belly kind of fill there, and exhale. It's really great. And twist to the other side, but maybe trying to find ways to activate that vagal response. You can research it as well. There's loads of ways. There's lots of work that you can do. There's even the suggestion that cold exposure is something that supports us with that vagus nerve and tapping into that what's it called, calm, a parasympathetic nervous system. But I wanted to say cold exposure for me, I'm sure you hear my funny accent. Grew up in Canada, but I've lived in the UK the last 18 years. But I grew up running in the lakes doing something called a polar bear swim, where there's a hole cut in the ice. Crazy me for charity, running and jumping. You will not catch me dead getting into that kind of cold plunge. That's just not for me anymore. I'm a nice warm bath kind of girl. But if you wanted to, just try and snap out, say you wake up and you're straight away feel like, hey, I'm waking up in stress response, a cold water on a cloth or a flannel and placing it on your face, splashing cold water on your face, that cold flannel in itself can also just kind of hijack a little bit and activate that vagus nerve or that calm response. So, if you feel like taking a cold shower, again, that is that like vagus response, that could potentially, you could get from there. You get it from humming and chanting and singing. So if you are a singer, joining a choir, there's science behind why you feel really good doing that. But if you've got a not so good voice like myself, just remember that it is actually a good thing just to turn on your favorite song, turn it up in the car. If you've got children, turn up on some songs, teach them some favorites, and just get singing and actually humming, especially in those long tones. It starts to vibrate and actually stimulates that vagus nerve, which is really interesting because when they talk about it in the chest, it runs really close to your vocal cords. So when we're looking at like that physical nerve, it does help. Chanting in yoga is quite common, but the science behind it is it because it helps us really tap the body into that calm nervous system, and then we can clear the mind. And the goal is to find a space where you can meditate as such. And meditation, for many, is a little bit, we can talk about that another day. But I find that meditation for me, the simplest form is just being able to have a clear mind as much as possible, which sometimes feels very difficult and sometimes feels a little bit easier. But all of these things will help you get a little closer to that, that place where you can have that prefrontal cortex, the front part of the brain where you make those decisions, where you think clearly, where you feel like you've made a decision from calmness, from clarity, from confidence, all of that. That's what we want, right? In our lives, we want to be making those decisions knowing that it's not come from a space of fight or flight or that quick response. We want to be in control and feel in control and feel calm and feel a little bit more at peace and feel safe in spaces where we actually are safe. And these theories hopefully will help you. So yeah, there's many other ways. I just wanted to kind of get into it a little bit more, but over time, the biggest goal here and the reason why I wanted to focus on this today is just I wanted to give you some kind of space to think about, like, it's just about finding some regulation over time. Healing from trauma isn't about never getting triggered again, but it's more about kind of just building capacity to return back home to yourself, to your body, to that place of peace after stress. Um, and maybe to start increasing our time into that, like they call it the ventral vagal state, when everything's working together, the body, the brain, the messages, we're all just feeling good, feeling in that kind of flow, that space that we've been desiring. And it really teaches our body, like, right now, like, it's safe now. And we do that consistently and gently. So yeah, the polyvagal lens, looking through that, learning about the nervous system, it invites us to kind of look at ourselves with a bit more compassion and not judgment. And so if you're anxious, you shut down, you feel stuck, remember, it is not a weakness. It's just your body trying to protect you. And the more that you can learn about the nervous system, the more that you can find ways that work for you to help you tap into that calm space instead of, just working against it. Healing will become so much more accessible and almost like embodied. So yeah, I just wanted to say you've got this. Thank you for listening. And I do hope that there's a little golden nugget in there for you to take with you on your healing journey. Yeah, come back to that breath as well anytime. All right. Peace and love. I wish you the best week ahead. And I'll see you a little more next month for some of Bond's deep dives and my Wellbeing Wednesday. Peace and love, team. Yeah, love being with you, and yeah, wishing you nothing but good things as you continue your journey to healing.